Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz guitarist, singer, and poet Wendy Eisenberg. We caught up with her on June 12, 2020 to discuss her interesting life and music during this COVID-19 lockdown world. We also talked to her about her latest 2019 CD, Nervous System. Using the languages of free jazz, new music, metal, and art song, her music challenges the representational and technical demands placed on a guitar and banjo in contemporary music. Please get to know her and dig this interview.
So how's everything going in your neck of the woods? Where are you at exactly?
No one knows. I live in Turner's Falls, which is a small town in Massachusetts. Yeah, it's really peaceful. It's a really great place to quarantine because you can walk to everything you need, but it's still really rural and beautiful.
I just really kind of wanted to catch up about COVID and your life and music, and I think the first thing I want to ask, since, you know, the quarantine is kind of the biggest thing going on right now, when did you realize, like in early to mid-March, that all of these live shows were going to end and everything was going to kind of come to a grinding halt?
Well, what an incredibly deep question. I think I realized it in the last show that I played. There was a concert that was put on by the people in the International Contemporary Ensemble, and that took place in New York in like a speaker warehouse. And it had this crazy feeling that later I was talking to one of the organizers of the concert, and he described it as uncanny, which didn't seem exactly accurate, but held some sort of sway in my understanding of the evening. And so, but I agree with him, kind of, like, there's just this weird energy of, like, this is, like, someone had to drop off because they were exposed to someone with COVID. So the show was shorter than it would have ordinarily been. And there's not that many people there. And it felt very, like, 1939, for lack of a better word.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an extremely heavy concert. And I think leading up to that concert, I was about to do a tour in South America, and which I didn't end up doing because of COVID. And just hearing reports from down there about what was going on and that I would probably need to quarantine down there if I were to go. I think all of it just sort of like snowballed in a personal way for me, so that I realized, like, oh, this way of life is really ending. Like, there's no real mobility here anymore after years of touring.
Yeah, and I remember, I think it was probably the 11th or 12th when the address, the president talked to everybody and said, you know, it's serious and this is what's going to happen. I think I realized everything was going to come to a halt. I think there was just something inherently in everybody that knew it was going to end, and, you know, we were just going to have a new way of life. So have you been creating? What have you been doing during quarantine to kind of keep your, you know, creative id satiated?
Well, I made a record, so that was a really good way to organize my time. I had quarantined prior to that in December, following some personal stuff that had happened, and recorded a bunch of songs, and then decided to finish what I had done by using this quarantine as sort of a shadow version. So I have been writing a lot of, or at first I was writing a lot of music and recording a lot in my apartment studio sort of situation, and using the time to just, like, get better at recorded music. But I was also playing a lot of live stream concerts at the time, which I have since kind of ceased doing because it just didn't feel as rewarding. But yeah, it's been a surprisingly second time to be relating to my instrument. Like, last night I was just playing on a friend's guitar a bunch of these, like, really simple chords and kind of getting back into what the instrument really is rather than what jazz kind of makes guitar into. So yeah. There's a kind of profundity to, like, what I've been able to work through in this kind of gaping hole of a time.
It's interesting, you know, the things that I've learned over this time of talking to musicians, and I've talked to quite a few during quarantine, and I must say, since you're a jazz guitarist, first and foremost, I moved to Lee Summit, Missouri, the home of Pat Metheny, and I'm about 25 yards. I'm in a local park away from the only real memorial here, and it has this sign that says the home of Pat Metheny. So just so you have a measure of relativity, But the one, yeah, it's cool. Yeah. He hasn't been back here for a while, but it would be nice. It would be very welcome. So the one thing that I didn't realize until all of this, and I'm surprised I hadn't, is that I've heard musicians say, yeah, I was in quarantine already. I was getting ready for this year. Like there was one musician that said that he spent last year getting ready for this year, and then of course this year is this year, the place that no one really wanted to go to. And I find it very interesting that that's already been kind of a thing that has existed. So, where were you born and raised? When did all of this begin? When did you get the seeds for jazz?
I was born and raised in a small town in Maryland called Gaithersburg. And I got really into jazz when I was about 11. I had some teachers that led a jazz band, sort of like youth jazz situation around then in Rockville. And that kind of made me want to do it forever. It just seemed like it was harder than everything else I had learned before, and I always wanted things to be difficult.
I understand that notion.
Thank you for understanding.
Believe me, I am, along with being a radio host, I do visual arts and I write poetry and all of that. It's like I've gotten to a crossroads in my life where it's like I pick everything that is probably the hardest thing to do and garners so little money. It's like, why did I do that? But you got a soul that you have to water, and money isn't the only source of doing that.
Exactly. I'm so glad you understand.
Yeah, I do. Believe me. I've been asking that question for a long time in my life, but I love it. It's all fueled by love. So, what was the first live jazz show you saw that blew you away?
Wow. It's so funny. No one's ever asked me that. And I have a sort of Swiss cheese memory for like random things like that because it all kind of coalesces into more of a movement for me. But I remember, ironically, because you just brought it up, or not really ironically, but funnily, seeing Matheny with Meltdown in like 2006 and being like,
wow.
Whoa, like this is really special and great.
What do you like the best about being a performer? We're in this moment where, the live jazz isn't happening, and I'm sure there's been a lot of thoughts about getting back to it. But what is it that you like best about it?
Well, I like that I'm sort of in a guild. I feel like everybody that I perform alongside of, or not even just alongside of, like with, next to, whatever, I feel really close to these people that are practicing lineage that spans and comes from things that are beyond us. Like in the current political moment, there's so much happening with race relations in this country, and it's really centering to me how this music works and how this music has labored under oppression for a little time. And I feel like when I'm at my best as a performer in this music, I'm carrying forth values that are not from my culture and kind of existing in dialogue to them. And that is a really beautiful way to engage with other people, because it's not just the straight engagement of performance where you're like, I'm performing for you, which has somewhat of a hierarchical bent, but it's more like I'm performing alongside my heroes at all times, and my heroes are really different from me. And so I feel like the dialogues are the most amazing part.
I think that's the thing that's always there's so many things that are refreshing, not only about jazz, but jazz musicians, is that there's this genteel, humble notion of a craft, of a history, of a lineage that's getting passed along. There's always a torch. Like, I was fortunate enough to interview Sonny Rollins some years ago, and as high up on the food chain of not just jazz, but art that he is, how humble he was, and how open and how gracious he was. And really, there's this spirit, and I don't know if it's because of where he's at in his age. I have a feeling that there's a timelessness to him that just wants to pass along this art form because it is that special. And I think that's the thing that's so refreshing about what you said, is that you really are dancing alongside thousands and thousands of ghosts that have celebrated the original protest music, which we call jazz.
I completely agree, and I feel like you have to really you have to commit yourself to understanding what that lineage means, not just musically but politically. And I feel like now is just such a ripe time to figure out everyone's personal relationship with that. I've been doing a lot of reading about like Black culture and aesthetics, and trying to figure out what exactly is kosher for me to be playing and what is really not mine. And I feel like nothing is really forbidden, but there are just so many different like angles that you have to tease through. And I feel really, really privileged that I got to learn in a deep way like what this lineage enough so that I could sort of break it and do my own thing also with it. That was a little bit clumsy of a couple of sentences, but I do feel really lucky.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that I've always hoped, I mean, obviously spinning jazz and being involved in this for the way I am, is that I've always been hopeful of a resurgence. And I don't know that it will get to a point where it was years ago where it was on the radio all the time, but I think that maybe this moment in our history will provide that, because the great thing I think about, and I don't know that anybody even conceived this during this quarantine, was that we were going to have to find an ultimate silver lining. And as bad as what happened with George Floyd was, this is the silver lining. This is the moment where there's no distraction in our society anymore. There's no sporting event. There's no concert. There's no, well, we'll get to it. This has systematically been happening over and over and over again. And the people that are really affected are the ones that are unemployed and that have been kicked around for so long. And I think a part of this has gone from being a race thing to being a class war, where it's like the haves and have-nots. It's time for it to stop, and it's time for humanity to say this all needs to be a level playing field.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just a really exciting time because of what you're saying. Like, people have the time and the space to fight for what they really believe in, rather than being beholden to a capitalist system that doesn't allow them to fight for their values because they have to be earning money in like an impossible, never-ending time span. So I mean, there's a different kind of hurt that comes from the fact that we should have been able to fight for this the whole time. And I know that a lot of people's hearts are in the right places, but the work should have taken place years ago and has been taking place forever in much smaller ways. But I do feel particularly lucky to be part of a cultural movement that is jazz, that allows me to reflect on these things every single day. And so that I feel a little bit more prepared coming into such a moment to just be thinking about like Black culture and my relationship to it and how to be the best comrade that I can be.
I've been doing this for so long and I've enjoyed it so much. I don't even know how to vocalize anything that's going to be that's going to pay any specific credence to anything, because this is just the music that I've always celebrated, and it's always come from Black culture. It's inseparable from all of that. I mean, I personally had some time where I worked at a YMCA and I ran a youth teen center, and I didn't even talk about race with the kids. And I didn't because I didn't want to pay attention to the fact that I'm treating them as human beings, and they did me. And they didn't even have the dialogue with me. They didn't bring up white or black. And I think that's the thing that I hope that society starts realizing. We have to stop always bringing the obvious up, because when you bringing the obvious up, it's obviously something that's either festering or a part of what's going on in the room. And what should be going on in the room is that we're all humans, and we're all doing this irregardless of the way we look. We do it because that's just what you do, and I hope that's what we get out of this. I mean, that's a simplified version, but I think that's the hope, is that somehow we level this playing field in a very logical manner, and it doesn't have to be brought up all the time because we're treating each other right.
Yeah, I think this is true.
Let me ask you this. We're going to get back to live jazz at some point, and when we do that, what do you hope that both the musician and the audience member realizes about this time away from live music when they do return?
I hope to realize how sacred the communion is between everybody in the room that the performance is taking place in is. I feel like what I've been missing more than anything is the sense that somebody can play something and then the whole audience and the person themselves is irretrievably altered by the music that's been happening. I feel like I miss that more than I've missed any other aspect of anything except for maybe my family. Which is a really heavy thing to say because it's like I've been in performance and in communion with audiences at a deep level for so long, and just traveling to different places and becoming part of different communities, and just have had this unimaginable privilege to do that for so long. And now that it's been sort of revoked temporarily, I hope there's a sense that there's just an amazing sensibility that people really do make it. Like, this is an art form that isn't, it's so timely in the sense that it exists in time, but time is altered by the person who's performing it, and everybody can feel that by the way that they're playing. And I miss that time travel sensibility so deeply. So I feel like what I'd like people to just center when they see a jazz performance, or whenever the things go back to whatever could be considered normal, is that we're all time travelers when we do it, when we participate in someone's performance or when we perform. And that being revoked is a really painful separation because it kind of makes us realize how centered on clock time, which is such an imperialistic concept.
So I guess more hyper specifically, why do you love jazz? I mean, this goes back to the beginnings of when you were kind of allured by it, and up to this point being a musician. Why do you love it?
That's another deep question. I love it because of what you said about dancing with ghosts, and I love it because of what I said about time travel. I think that there's really few art forms that allow you to do both, where there's an angel and a devil on your back at all times, but it doesn't feel oppressive. And there's just so many beautiful time shifts and celebrations of joy and just creative impulse that's completely indulged in the music. And I feel like there's just no other music that allows for all of those things to happen at the same time. Like, other things are so much more regimented, and jazz, my teacher, Joe Morris, he calls free jazz specifically a perpetual frontier, and I feel like that's the aesthetic that I want to marry myself to, is a future that's always pushing itself even further forward. I feel like jazz does that better than anything else.
So if you could get into a time machine and go back in time, obviously we wouldn't go back to 2020. If you could go back in time and go to another era and see any musician and at any time, where would you go? And if you could talk to them and have a conversation, who would it be with?
That answer is going to change every single time that is asked, but I think right now I've been really digging into this Oliver Lake, Julia Senzel duo record, and I would want to be there at the recording session and be like, why? Wow. What? Thank you. But I think overall, probably mostly I'd want to just sit really close up to Wes Montgomery or Joao Gilberto and just talk to them about what time means to them, and just be like, both of you have this unbelievable sense of rhythmic acuity, and you're not thinking about it probably, but it's in your body. Where did it come from? What are you thinking about when it comes to rhythm? What is rhythm and time? And those two in particular, I just want to sit there and just be like, hey, Wes Montgomery in the 60s, smoking at the half note time. If I were there, oh my God, that would be crazy. Or if I was at the recording session for Black Woman by Sonny and Linda Sharrock, I would be blown away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So my final question to you is this. Everyone has a perception or a version of you, your family, your friends, and your fans, but you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
Wow.
I saved the easiest one for last.
Oh my God, getting existential here. I think I'm just another person who will eventually die and knows the limits of that, and cares a lot about that fact, like the limits of things, and ultimately takes those limits and tries to make music from them. I think I'm primarily a musician. This is so awkward. I feel like I'm just slammed with the most like essential question of my existence, but I feel like I was set on this earth to do music and to do it analytically and to do it gracefully, and I'm trying every day to own up to those facts.
That's great. That's a great answer. Wendy, thank you for taking some time out for Neon Jazz today. It's very surreal, like what I call the ultimate studio set of David Lynch, and it just feels like a Lynch film. So
it really does.
Yeah, it's weird. It's so weird. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Stay safe and good luck with everything.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure to talk to you about this.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Canada, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Wendy for her time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.